1959 was memorable because Honda arrived and booked in at the nursery hotel. We weren't fully aware of what had happened in the war, and certainly the Japanese arrived, and for a young fella running around Onken, the Honda badges and everything like that were much sought after, and they were very friendly people. The team manager was a chap called Bill Hunt, and he was in charge of the riders who brought over Honda Benleys to learn the Clypse course. And the person in question there, and was responsible for the photograph, is Naomi Taniguchi, who proved to be the best of the riders. I think he finished in 9th position, but the Honda won the team prize. But the first ever crash of a Honda took place not too far away from me now, down probably round by that largest tree. And what happened was, when we were living over there with Jeff, we heard that the race bikes were due any day, and certainly this driveway which went down from the front of the nursery was never used. It was all rooks' nests and twigs and moss and everything, and the gate was permanently locked at the bottom, and everybody used the top entrance. So when the works machines arrived, they had to fire them up. So they fired them up by pushing them down this driveway. Of course, what happened was, the first one got away with it. We could hear the crackle, and we were having tea, Jeff and myself, and we heard this roar of a bike. So I looked at him and he looked at me, and we knew exactly what it was, and jumped up from our tea, came out from the back there in the back lane, down in, this was like a big plantation, and hoofed it across there to see the works Hondas, the race bikes. The second that went down got away with it as well, but the third one that cracked up went down, and the mechanic in charge of the front part of it was a bit too ambitious with the front brake when it did crack up, and certainly was the first ever racing incident with a Honda on the Isle of Man, because the front brake and the tyre and all that didn't respond to the moss and the twigs and everything else, the residue that was down there, and down he went, much to his embarrassment. The bikes weren't awful good, I must admit. In fact, there isn't any of the race bikes available. The story goes that on the way back they were so disappointed with their performance that they threw them over the side. And not a great deal of success until 1961, when the legendary Mike Halewood won the 1961 125 to give them their first ever win, and then later in the week went on to win the 250 as well. But the history of Honda and racing certainly started on the Isle of Man in 1959, and Naomi Taniguchi there, still very friendly, Taniguchi-san, with a chap called John Dalton, who lives just up the road in Birch Hill, and has still remained friendly with him till this day. Yeah, this area that we are now, on the other side of that driveway we've just mentioned, there was like tiered seating here, as though they'd kind of constructed it for viewing. And we've got a few photographs to show you about that, but I would suggest take away the bus shelter. They were all in front of this line of trees, and when the riders, you could hear them coming through Onken village, down the White Bridge, and then turning right at the bottom at the Manx Arms, or as we preferred to be, we weren't too interested in drinking at about 7 or 8 years of age, but certainly we knew all about the Blue Dragon Cafe, and certainly that was the hive of interest for everybody in Onken. And of course Onken Stadium, which had been constructed, and give us motorcycle gymkhanas, cycling round there, my elder brother cycling round the track at Onken, and not stock cars in those days, but motorcycle events where you could win quite a bit of money if you could get through a hoop, through a barrel, under a tarpaulin. And many of the stories about gymkhanas, about girls coming on holiday and then suddenly finishing up in a pram. And Jack Nivison Stadium, as it is, been renamed. There's certainly a programme to talk about that. But when we go back, we would be on the tiered seating here, and we'll just give you an indication of what we viewed. Well, you viewed the bikes coming up from the Manx Arms, and that was there, sidecars again, chairs on the right, and coming up past the tiered seating there, which is in the car park of the Manx Arms, and then up into this sweeping left-hander at the nursery bends, and that's Eric Oliver and Eric Bliss in the chair, keeping the chair down. Absolutely smiling he was. It must have been an absolute joy. And then round the short kinky right-hander to take it out past Birchley Terrace there. and then head up towards Signpost Corner where they turned left and came down the original TT course. So that was us somewhere in the background, tight to this wall. 7 Avondale Road in Uncon, spent 2-3 years here, and certainly looking back down the road, you didn't have to go far for spectate. Just stand back in your little gateway here, and that's where you were. And they went right past you. The actual Manx Arms has not changed because the co-op has been on the corner all those years. In fact, I think it's the same dog that's chained up outside as it was when I was here in 1958. But Taveri, Hillebrand, Schneider, Knoll, all the names, Pravini, Ubiali, Hollhouse, Baltersberger, all came round there and headed up towards the nursery bends. Nice little story about, there was a Spaniard came over on a 2-stroke machine which was practically unheard of by us, and his name was Johnny Grace. And we couldn't understand how a simple name like that. But to bear in mind that in the old days you could ride under a non-deplume, which means that you didn't have to be who you said you were who you were, but you weren't, if that makes any sense, because you didn't want your parents to know. And Johnny Grace apparently was a Spaniard who lived in, I think, Gibraltar, and to get his license and came over here and rode the Montesa. But Johnny Grace, Montesa, yeah, it all comes back. Bruno Spaggiari. I have difficulty now pronouncing it, but it would be a hell of a job to spell it, I would think. But that was all part and parcel of TT history as well. As the road goes quiet here at Manx Arms, we hand you back to Peter Neal at the grandstand. Well, the year was 1958, and whereas even now this is a totally prohibited area, it wasn't in those days. And I was stood here, John Hartle riding at number 42 on the MV Augusta. We could hear him, we couldn't as yet see him, but out of that dip he came, looking down on the left-hand side of the bike, and it was ablaze. It was absolutely on fire. So instant panic as to what was going to happen. Me, being what age I was at that time, was fully unaware that petrol and fire don't mix very well together, and Hartle was fully aware of that as well, and parked it just a few yards up the road, which we'll move to after we've done here. But 58, and certainly the story about John Hartle can be confirmed by a photograph we've got, which we'll show you in a minute. So we went when Hartle was on fire and kind of felt he wasn't going to go much further, so we were kind of running alongside here, and the only person in this area. The marshals were all positioned over by the bridge. There wasn't too many on the exit from the dip, and they certainly didn't have a fire extinguisher. I went up through the hedge like this. John Hartle parked the bike against the pavement right at the end of 3rd Avenue. And that's what it looked like when it was ablaze and they'd managed to come from Governor's Bridge. It was absolutely flying. There was one photographer about who captured all the images, and certainly I can remember like an explosion as the tank went up and a big shoot of flame going up there, and me stood here. Was I stood there? Well, I certainly was. I'd acquired a Coca-Cola eye shade, and that's Jeff Cannell's push bike, and that is me there when the flames had died down. Toro Magni, who was the MV mechanic, came along to pick up the remains of Hartle's MV Augusta, cried his eyes out, and it was pushed round the corner into this first house here. But those were significant photographs. I think they made the front page of the Daily Express the following day. John Hartle, the MV on fire, and some well-known celebrities, as you can call it that. That's my brother, middle brother Brian Moore. That's Ralph Lowy, the news agents there from Prospect Terrace. But certainly John Hartle and that MV coming out of the dip, and the roister there leaning over the hedge, just like this, just watching it all happen. with not a care in the world and not fully aware that it could have been a total disaster. There was only me here. I was the only one, and that photographer, who went across the road to 3rd Avenue to film all the action. Not a happy memory, but certainly one that you can say and confirm that you were part and parcel of it. So that concludes the Roy Moore's Mountain Memories, 65 years plus of races I could recollect round the mountain course. We've just met the owner of Barney the Dog.
Guilty.
First time I've ever sat on the bench at Douglas Road Corner, Kirkmichael. The simple fact is I'm either stuck at Ballycrane or the bungalow. Known as Aggo's Loop, Leap I think would be the correct term to use, Royster. Aggo's Leap is originally it started off as just being a voice kind of contribution. I spoilt the image of myself by a few people, but certainly in TT 2018 you'll be able to recall now that what I look like when we get to Ramsey Hairpin, and obviously the voice hasn't changed, I don't think, over that time. I said it might be condoms because it's got Safeways on the side. And as we stand here at Manx Radio Studios, the Ben McCree is just swinging round in the harbour, bringing all those people who will have their own mountain memories after TT 2018 for the last time. Roy Moore's Mountain Memories back to the grandstand.